The sponge method, as described by Joe Bandel in Chapter 20 of the Oak Matrix Unleashed, suggests that we are all essentially walking around as clogged sponges, operating at barely 5% of our true energetic capacity because we are saturated with the dirty water of stress, self-doubt, and old habits. It is a provocative starting point, especially when you consider that most of us spent our lives trying to conserve energy rather than intentionally draining it to make room for something better.
It really flips the script on the standard burnout narrative. Usually we are told to avoid exhaustion at all costs, but Bandel argues that living intensely requires a rhythmic cycle of total release and deep absorption. He calls it duality as a loving embrace. Think about a physical sponge. If you never squeeze it out, the water inside becomes stagnant and eventually the sponge can't take in anything new. It becomes useless. We do the same thing emotionally and mentally. We hold on to old psychic debris and then wonder why we feel heavy and uninspired.
And he uses the oak tree as the central metaphor here, which makes sense given the book's title. An oak isn't just static, it cycles. It releases its leaves in the autumn to conserve and then absorbs the spring rains to burst into new growth. But for humans, this isn't just about seasons. It is a daily, even hourly practice of managing what he calls the astral body.
That's where the technical breakdown gets interesting. In Bandel's framework, which he calls organic Gnosticism, the physical body is a biological battery, but it's a limited one. It only generates a fraction of the power we actually need to be fully alive or magnetic. When we push our physical limits, like reaching that second wind during a run, we aren't just burning calories, we are actually overflowing energy from the physical container into the astral body, which enhances our aura and charisma.
But isn't there a danger in that squeeze? If someone is already feeling depleted, telling them to drain themselves further sounds like a recipe for a total breakdown. How does he distinguish between a healthy sponge method drain and just plain old overworking?
The distinction lies in the loving embrace of duality. A healthy drain is generative and intentional. It's the difference between a high-intensity workout that leaves you feeling good tired and the soul-sucking exhaustion of a toxic job. Bandel is very clear that the soak, the recharge, must be protected with absolute boundaries. He describes the night as a safe harbor where you must shield yourself from energy drainers like late-night scrolling or toxic people. If you squeeze the sponge but then leave it on a dirty counter, it just absorbs more toxins. You have to ensure that when you soak, you're soaking in fresh water, solitude, nature, or deep rest.
He actually maps this method across the entire chakra system, which provides a really specific blueprint for people who feel clogged in different areas of their lives. For example, he says if you're stuck at the root chakra, you drain it through physical exercise and recharge in nature. But for the heart chakra, the drain comes from passionate pursuits, really throwing yourself into what you love, while the recharge comes from deep, loving connections.
It's a comprehensive way to look at vitality, and it explains why we often feel clogged. If you're working a job that drains your throat chakra, the concrete mental energy of tasks and focus, but you never recharge it through reflection or silence, you become brittle. Bandel suggests that as we repeat these cycles, the sponge of our energy system actually expands. We move from holding 5% to 10, then 20, eventually becoming what he calls a universal sponge that draws vitality not just from food and sleep, but from the cosmos itself, what some traditions call prana or chi.
I want to push back on the manifestation aspect he mentions. He claims that if you charge your energy fully and then squeeze it toward a specific goal with intent, you can clear obstacles or even will a breakthrough. That sounds a bit like The Secret on steroids. Is there any grounded psychological basis for this, or is it purely metaphysical?
There is a link to chaos theory and the concept of critical points. When you build intensity in any system, you eventually hit a threshold where the system has to transform or leap to a new state. Psychologically, think about flow states described by researchers like Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi. When you are fully engaged and drained by a task, your focus becomes so sharp that obstacles seem to vanish. Bandel is essentially taking that psychological peak performance and framing it within an esoteric energy model. He's saying that the intensity acts as a flush for the subconscious mind, removing the toxins of doubt that usually prevent us from achieving goals.
It also seems to be a reaction against the modern wellness industry's obsession with moderation. Bandel is essentially saying, don't be moderate, be rhythmic. Be 100% active and then 100% at rest. That's a huge shift from the grind culture where you're perpetually at 60% and always exhausted.
Exactly. The grind is a slow wearing down of the self. The sponge method is a series of spikes and renewals, and he gives very practical ways to start this. He recommends an energy cycle journal to track these drains and recharges. You don't just write, I worked out, you write drained root chakra through a 1-hour run, felt a release. It forces you to become conscious of the specific quality of energy you're moving.
He even suggests a partner flow share, which I found fascinating. You and a friend alternate between being the squeeze, where you share the intensity of your day, and the soak, where you listen and absorb supportively. It turns a conversation into a literal energetic exchange.
It's about making duality a lived experience. In his other writings, like his translations of early German horror and his Oak Tarot, Bandel often explores these dark, electric tensions. The sponge method is his way of bringing that intensity into everyday life without it becoming destructive. It's the idea that we are built for the storm, like the oak, and that trying to stay safe and unsqueezed actually causes our best parts to atrophy.
One of the most striking parts of the chapter is the warning about being a squeezed sponge. If you give and give without the recharge, you become brittle and useless. That seems to be his explanation for why people become bitter or dry in their creative lives. They've forgotten how to soak.
And the clogged sponge is just as bad. That's the person who is full of potential but never acts on it. They're saturated with old water, old ideas, old fears, and they can't take in anything new. The flush is mandatory. You have to be willing to let go of who you were yesterday to become the more vibrant version of yourself tomorrow.
It's a powerful metaphor for personal evolution. By the end of the chapter, he paints a picture of a life that isn't just about getting by, but about overflowing. Once the sponge is clean and its capacity is expanded, the energy doesn't just sit there, it radiates. That's where the charisma and magnetism come from. It's not a performance, it's a surplus of vitality.
It's a call to move away from the fear of depletion. If you know how to soak, you don't have to be afraid to squeeze. You can live intensely, throw yourself into your work, your passions, and your relationships, knowing that the universe is an infinite reservoir of fresh water waiting for you at the end of the day.
It really reframes rest as a radical, active part of growth rather than a passive necessity. You're not just sleeping, you're absorbing the next day's potential.
It's the rhythmic flow of the oak, roots deep in the earth, branches reaching for the sun, always cycling, always renewing. Bandel is essentially saying that we can choose to live that way too, moving from exhaustion to exhilaration by simply trusting the cycle.
And that really is the big takeaway here, that vitality isn't something you find, it's something you cycle. By intentionally draining the old and protecting the recharge of the new, we can transform ourselves from stagnant, clogged containers into vibrant, resilient forces of nature.
It starts with that first conscious squeeze. Whether it's a physical push, a mental challenge, or an emotional release, the goal is to empty the vessel so it can be filled with something far more powerful than what was there before.
For anyone looking to break out of a rut or reclaim their energy, Bandel's sponge method offers a roadmap that is as demanding as it is rewarding. It turns the mundane rhythm of day and night into a sacred cycle of empowerment.
And as the capacity grows, the life itself expands. You aren't just surviving the day, you're mastering the energy of your own existence.
It's a fascinating perspective on what it means to be truly alive. If this concept of rhythmic renewal resonated with you, consider sharing this episode with someone who might be feeling a bit clogged lately.